What if I told you that the very kindness you show others might be the exact reason they can't stand being around you? That your good intentions could be driving people away faster than any cruelty ever could? Stay with me, because what Carl Jung discovered about human psychology will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about kindness, relationships, and why some people seem to repel others despite their best efforts. By the end of this video, you'll understand the dark psychological forces at play when kindness backfires, and more importantly, you'll know exactly what to do about it. Picture this: you're the person who always says yes. You're helpful, considerate, always putting others first. Yet somehow people seem uncomfortable around you. They make excuses to leave conversations early, they don't invite you to gatherings. What's going on? According to Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, this phenomenon runs far deeper than simple social dynamics. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but what happens when people are irritated by our kindness itself?" Jung discovered that human psychology operates on levels most people never even realize exist. He spent decades studying why certain behaviors, even positive ones, can trigger such negative reactions in others, and what he found will disturb you. But here's where it gets really interesting. Carl Jung identified what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, and here's the shocking truth. When you're consistently kind to people who aren't kind to themselves, you're actually forcing them to confront their own shadow. Jung explained that every person carries within them a shadow self, the repository of all the qualities, impulses, and characteristics they've rejected about themselves. When someone encounters genuine kindness, especially when they're struggling with self-criticism or guilt, your kindness becomes a mirror reflecting everything they hate about their own behavior. According to Carl Jung, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed, but sometimes that transformation feels threatening, and this is just the beginning of why your kindness might be backfiring. Think about someone you know who's constantly self-critical. When you show them unconditional kindness, what are you really doing? You're demonstrating a level of compassion they can't show themselves. Your kindness becomes evidence of their own inner harshness. Jung discovered that people will often reject kindness, not because they don't want it, but because accepting it would force them to acknowledge how unkind they are to themselves. Your gentleness highlights their self-cruelty. Your patience showcases their self-judgment. But wait, there's something even more disturbing Jung uncovered about this dynamic. Here's what most people don't realize. Carl Jung distinguished between this persona, the mask we wear in social situations, and our authentic self. And sometimes your kindness is so threatening because it demands authenticity in return. Jung said, the persona is a compromise between individual and society as to what a man should appear to be. But what happens when someone's entire persona is built on being tough, independent, or emotionally unavailable? Your kindness becomes a direct challenge to their carefully constructed identity. According to Carl Jung, genuine kindness has a way of dissolving personas. It creates an atmosphere where pretense becomes difficult to maintain. And for people whose entire social identity depends on their persona, this feels incredibly dangerous. Here's where Jung's insights get really profound. When you're authentically kind, not performatively kind, but genuinely caring, you create what Jung called a container for authentic emotion. This container allows real feelings to emerge, but for someone who spent years suppressing their vulnerability, your kindness can feel like an invasion. Jung discovered that some people have organized their entire psychological structure around not needing kindness. They've convinced themselves that independence means isolation, that strength means never showing weakness. When you offer genuine care, you're essentially asking them to reorganize their entire psychological foundation. And this brings us to one of Jung's most disturbing discoveries about human nature. Carl Jung identified something he called the collective unconscious inherited psychological patterns that influence our behavior without our awareness. And here's the shocking part. Some people's rejection of kindness isn't even about you or them personally. According to Carl Jung, we inherit psychological templates from previous generations. If someone comes from a family lineage where kindness was associated with weakness, manipulation, or conditional love, their unconscious mind may perceive your genuine care as a threat, even when it isn't. Jung explained that these inherited patterns operate below the level of conscious awareness. Someone might logically know that your kindness is genuine, but their collective unconscious is screaming warnings based on ancestral experiences they never directly lived. But here's what makes this even more complex. Jung discovered that trauma patterns can skip generations but still influence behavior. Someone whose grandparent experienced betrayal disguised as kindness might unconsciously reject genuine care, even when they have no conscious memory of that ancestral wound. This means that sometimes when people can't stand your kindness, they're not really rejecting you, they're rejecting ghosts from the past that your behavior has unconsciously activated. And this leads us to Jung's most counterintuitive insight about kindness. Here's something that will blow your mind. Carl Jung discovered that we unconsciously project aspects of our inner masculine and feminine onto others, and sometimes your kindness triggers these projections in ways that create intense discomfort. Jung identified the anima as the feminine aspect within men and the animus as the masculine aspect within women. But here's where it gets complicated. These inner figures carry both positive and negative qualities based on our early experiences. According to Carl Jung, if someone had a relationship with a caregiver who was kind but ultimately harmful, perhaps smothering, controlling or guilt-inducing, your genuine kindness might unconsciously remind them of that negative or animus figure. This is where Jung's psychology gets really disturbing. Jung said, the anima and animus are the archetypal figures that compensate for the conscious attitude. But when these figures are contaminated by negative experiences, healthy expressions of their qualities can trigger intense rejection. A person whose anima carries the imprint of a manipulative but superficially kind mother might unconsciously perceive all kindness as manipulation. Someone whose animus carries the shadow of a gentle but weak father might interpret your compassion as weakness or contempt. But Jung discovered something even more unsettling about these projections. Carl Jung believed that every person is on a journey toward individuation, becoming their authentic self. But here's the paradox. Genuine kindness can actually threaten someone's individuation process by making them feel dependent or inferior. According to Carl Jung, individuation requires integrating both positive and negative aspects of the self, but when someone is in the middle of this process trying to develop their own strength, boundaries, or sense of self, your kindness can feel like it's undermining their progress. Jung discovered that people sometimes need to reject kindness in order to develop their own capacity for self-care. If you're always there to support, encourage, or help, you might inadvertently be preventing someone from developing their own psychological muscles. And here's where Jung's insight becomes really profound. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But sometimes becoming who you truly are requires rejecting external sources of validation or support, even when that support is genuinely offered. This means that someone's rejection of your kindness might actually be a healthy part of their individuation process. They're not rejecting you personally, they're rejecting dependency in all its forms as they work to develop their own inner strength. But wait, Jung uncovered something even more surprising about this dynamic. Here's one of Carl Jung's most revolutionary discoveries. The psyche always seeks balance through what he called compensation, and sometimes your excessive kindness forces others into compensatory cruelty just to maintain psychological equilibrium. Jung explained that when one person in a relationship system exhibits extreme behavior in one direction, others will unconsciously compensate by moving in the opposite direction. If you're consistently kind, understanding, and accommodating, someone else in the system may become critical, demanding, or harsh, not because they want to, but because the psychological system demands balance. According to Carl Jung, this compensation happens automatically and unconsciously. The person becoming more harsh doesn't consciously decide to balance your kindness, their psyche does it for them. This is where Jung's psychology reveals something truly disturbing. Jung discovered that in some relationships, one person's excessive virtue actually enables another person's dysfunction. Your kindness might be preventing someone from facing the natural consequences of their behavior, which keeps them stuck in destructive patterns. When you're always understanding, always forgiving, always supportive, you might be robbing others of the opportunity to develop their own conscience, their own sense of responsibility, their own capacity for self-reflection. And this brings us to Jung's most controversial insight about kindness. Here's something Carl Jung understood that most people miss. Sometimes our kindness isn't as pure as we think it is. And other people can sense our unconscious motivations even when we can't. Jung said, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. But what if your darkness is hidden within your light? What if your kindness carries unconscious elements of superiority, control, or self-righteousness? According to Carl Jung, people have an uncanny ability to sense our unconscious motivations. If your kindness is motivated by a need to be needed, a desire to feel superior, or an attempt to control how others perceive you, people will sense this, even if you don't realize it yourself. Here's where Jung's insight becomes really uncomfortable. Jung discovered that helper's high, the good feeling we get from being kind, can become addictive. And when we're addicted to helping, we unconsciously seek out people who need help, which can create unhealthy dynamics where we're invested in others remaining dependent. If your kindness requires others to be grateful, if it needs to be acknowledged or reciprocated, if it comes with subtle strings attached, then it's not pure kindness, it's manipulation disguised as virtue. And people can sense this manipulation even when it's unconscious. But Jung uncovered something even more disturbing about unconscious motivations. Carl Jung identified the archetype of the wounded healer, someone who helps others heal wounds similar to their own. But here's the problem: sometimes we're trying to heal others because we can't heal ourselves. According to Carl Jung, when we have unresolved wounds, we might unconsciously seek to heal those same wounds in other people. This creates a dynamic where our kindness is actually about us, not about them. And people can sense this self-serving quality. Jung explained that the wounded healer can be incredibly effective when they've done their own healing work. But when the healer is still wounded and unconscious of it, their attempts to help become projections of their own need for healing. This is where Jung's psychology gets really deep. If you experienced neglect as a child, you might compulsively offer attention to others, not because they need it, but because the neglected child within you needs it. If you experienced criticism, you might offer excessive praise, again, not for others, but to heal your own critical wounds. Jung discovered that when our kindness is really about healing ourselves, it carries an energy that feels intrusive to others. They sense that we need something from them, their gratitude, their improvement, their validation of our goodness. And this need makes our kindness feel heavy rather than light. And this leads to one of Jung's most profound insights about authentic helping. Here's what Carl Jung discovered about authentic kindness. It comes from what he called the transcendent function, a state where our conscious and unconscious minds are integrated, allowing us to act from genuine wholeness rather than unconscious need. Jung said, the transcendent function is the bridge between conscious and unconscious contents of the mind. When we act from this integrated state, our kindness becomes truly selfless. It has no agenda, no need for reciprocation, no unconscious strings attached. According to Carl Jung, this kind of authentic service is rare because it requires extensive inner work. Most of us are operating from some level of unconscious need, projection, or compensation. Our kindness, however well-intentioned, carries the energy of our unresolved psychological material. But here's what makes this so challenging. Jung discovered that developing the transcendent function requires facing everything we'd rather avoid about ourselves, our shadows, our wounds, our unconscious motivations. It means becoming conscious of all the ways our kindness might be serving us rather than others. This is uncomfortable work, because it means questioning our identity as good people. It means acknowledging that even our most virtuous behaviors might be contaminated by unconscious selfishness or need. And this brings us to Jung's practical solution for this dilemma. Carl Jung's solution to the kindness paradox isn't to stop being kind, it's to integrate what he called the opposites. This means developing the capacity for both kindness and healthy boundaries, both compassion and discernment. According to Carl Jung, psychological health requires the integration of opposite qualities. If we're only kind, we become doormats. If we're only tough, we become cruel. True psychological maturity means developing the ability to be appropriately kind or appropriately firm, depending on the situation. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This includes accepting our capacity for both kindness and necessary cruelty, both compassion and healthy selfishness. Here's where Jung's teaching becomes transformative. Jung discovered that when we integrate opposites within ourselves, we no longer trigger compensatory reactions in others. When people sense that we're capable of both kindness and firmness, they don't feel the need to become harsh to balance our excessive gentleness. This integration allows us to be kind without being naive, compassionate without being enabling, generous without being self-sacrificing. Our kindness becomes clean, free from unconscious motivations and neediness. But Jung had one final crucial insight about this integration process. Here's Carl Jung's ultimate revelation: authentic kindness is selective. When we try to be kind to everyone all the time, we're not being authentic. We're performing kindness rather than expressing it genuinely. Jung believed that authenticity requires discrimination, the ability to sense who genuinely welcomes kindness and who experiences it as intrusive or threatening. According to Carl Jung, indiscriminate kindness is often a defense against the anxiety of having to make real choices about who deserves our energy. Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." When we look inside honestly, we realize that we don't actually feel equally kind toward everyone, and pretending we do creates the very inauthenticity that others find repelling. This is where Jung's insight becomes revolutionary. Jung discovered that selective kindness, kindness offered consciously to those who can receive it well, is far more powerful than universal kindness offered unconsciously to everyone, regardless of their capacity to receive it. When we're selectively kind, our kindness carries the energy of choice rather than compulsion. People can sense that we chose to be kind to them specifically rather than being kind, because that's just what we do with everyone. And this leads to Jung's final most practical insight. In a world obsessed with surface-level niceness and performative compassion, Carl Jung's insights into human psychology offer a radical alternative that challenges everything we think we know about kindness and relationships. His ultimate teaching about human connection cuts through centuries of moral conditioning to reveal a profound truth. Consciousness is more important than kindness. This isn't a dismissal of compassion, but rather a deeper understanding of what genuine care actually requires. When we become conscious of our motivations, our projections, and our unconscious patterns, our relationships naturally transform from superficial exchanges into authentic connections. Jung's approach asks us to look beyond the mask of niceness to understand the psychological forces that drive our interactions with others. According to Carl Jung, most relationship problems aren't really about the behaviors we're exhibiting on the surface. They're about the unconscious energies and motivations operating beneath those behaviors. This insight revolutionizes how we understand interpersonal conflict and connection. Consider how often we experience confusion when someone reacts negatively to our genuine attempts at kindness. We offer help, express care, or try to be supportive only to be met with resistance, irritation, or rejection. Jung would suggest that what we're experiencing isn't actually about our kind actions but about the unconscious material we're carrying into the interaction. Our unconscious minds are filled with unprocessed emotions, unmet needs, childhood wounds, and defensive patterns that we're often completely unaware of. These hidden elements infuse our actions with energy that others can sense, even when we're consciously trying to be helpful or caring. When we clean up our unconscious material through self-examination and inner work, our kindness naturally becomes more authentic and effective. Jung said, "Everything depends on the quality of consciousness we bring to whatever we do." This principle transforms how we understand the effectiveness of our actions. It means that conscious selfishness, where we're aware of our needs and honest about our motivations, might be healthier than unconscious altruism, where we're helping others to avoid facing our own inner work. Similarly, conscious boundaries, where we're clear about our limits and communicate them with awareness, might actually be kinder than unconscious accommodation, where we say yes to everything while building resentment underneath. Understanding this principle practically means fundamentally shifting the questions we ask ourselves about our relationships and interactions. Instead of the surface-level question, "How can I be kinder?" Jung would have us dive deeper and ask, "How can I be more conscious? What unconscious needs am I trying to meet through my kindness? What am I avoiding by focusing on others' needs rather than my own?" These questions reveal the hidden motivations that often drive our helpful behaviors. Are we being kind because we genuinely care about someone's well-being, or because we're afraid of conflict? Are we offering help because it serves the other person, or because it makes us feel valuable and needed? Are we being accommodating because it's truly what the situation calls for, or because we're terrified of disappointing others? When we become conscious of these patterns, something remarkable happens. Our kindness naturally becomes more skillful and effective. We stop offering help to people who don't actually want it, and can sense when our offers of assistance are really about our own need to feel useful rather than genuine service to others. We stop being nice simply to avoid conflict, recognizing that this pattern often creates more problems than it solves. We develop the capacity to engage with disagreement and tension when necessary, understanding that sometimes conflict is the path to deeper understanding and connection. We stop using kindness as a strategy to manage others' opinions of us, freeing ourselves from the exhausting cycle of people-pleasing and allowing others to have their authentic reactions to who we truly are. This transformation creates something beautiful and paradoxical in our relationships. Here's the beautiful paradox that Carl Jung uncovered through decades of working with patients and exploring his own psyche. When we stop trying to be universally kind and start being consciously authentic, people actually find us more attractive and trustworthy. When we integrate our shadows, the parts of ourselves we typically reject or hide, our light becomes genuinely radiant rather than artificially bright. Jung understood that human beings are instinctively drawn to wholeness, not perfection. When we're trying to be only kind, only positive, only helpful, we're presenting half a person to the world. And this incompleteness feels inauthentic to others even when they